Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon by Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
Before I start my prepared remarks, I want to welcome a family, one particular family, to our sanctuary this Shabbat. As many of you know, in a joint project with IKAR, we have been sponsoring a family it's a refugee from the war in Ukraine. And Vadim and Masha Volnikov are here with us, and we are so delighted that you are with us and honored to be a part of your acculturation to this country. And we hope you feel always at home here and supported and loved. And we just welcome you amongst us, Vadim and Masha. Thank you for being here today. I'm starting my 16th year as the Rabbi Temple Beth and my Marshall clapped. I'll take that. Shabbat Shalom. And my 25th year as a congregational rabbi. It's hard to believe. And your most recent past is the thing that is most present in your mind. So the years that I've spent here obviously fill up most of what I think about in terms of my work, my life, my friends, my community. But I spent 9 years in my first congregation. I'm still in touch with many of the people from that community. It's where I learned how to be a rabbi. It's a very, very different kind of place. And the experiences that I had there are still very much a part of me, and I think about them a lot. And in particular, I think about the many ways in which the transition from there to here was challenging. At least for me. I don't know what it was like for you. And it was challenging on a lot of levels. I went from a rural, suburban area to an urban area, from a small community where I was the only employee, the only full-time employee. We had a part-time office manager, to a community like this with a large staff. I went from having no colleagues anywhere near me to sharing every day with colleagues and just meeting all of the members of this community. But one of the transitions that was hardest for me in terms of my style and my philosophy of the rabbinate and the prayer was moving from a community that only had one thing going on every Shabbat morning. We didn't have the space or the staff to consider anything else. If you were 2 years old or you were 92 years old, you were in the sanctuary. Now, kids would run in and out. We didn't have teen programming outside that room. We didn't have a breakout minyan. We didn't have a Torah study over there and a coffee maker over there. We had a room. And it served that community well. And I was excited about coming to a community where there were so many options and offerings on a Shabbat morning, a community that in many ways launched the notion of a wonderful breakout minyan in the American Jewish communal experience, right? When the library minyan was founded in 1971 or 72, that was not the norm. And Beth had been and still is proud of what is called, where'd my paper go? Not that I'm looking at it. A Cineplex model, where on Shabbat morning you can come in and have many different types of spiritual, educational, communal needs met. I was excited, but it was a hard transition. There were and still are aspects of the way that community in Monroe, New York, davened on Shabbat morning that have real benefits. Number one, everyone who came to synagogue on Shabbat had a version of the exact same experience. There was a shared spiritual investment. Everyone had sung the same songs, heard the same words from the Bima, whether they were good or not good. When you walked at a shul, everyone with whom you had been in shul had been together. There was also an advantage of the fact that because of that, you got used to the fact, which adults should get used to a lot of times in their lives, which is not everything is catered directly to your aesthetic. You don't have all of your needs met when you are investing in the communal. And while there might have been a part of a service that you would have liked done differently, and had you been in a different community, maybe for that part of the service, a group would have left the room and done something different over there, you learned to yield. There was a supple nature foisted upon you because everyone was giving to the communal experience. And number 3, the Ruach was all combined. Anyone singing in the building was singing in the same room. Anyone praying in the building was praying in the same room. And this verse from the book of Proverbs, Mishlei, that I quote a lot, Berov am hadrat melech, when the people are in the multitudes, then the sovereign is honored yet more. In our own small way, that's what's happening every week in that one space. There are also advantages to a Shabbat morning experience like we have at Temple Beth Am, and that happen in many other synagogues around the country. You can niche program. You can have specific educational and prayer experiences geared towards the 6-year-olds and the 10-year-olds and the 15-year-olds. And for the people who want a sermon, and the people who want a text study, and the people who want to be led by a rabbi, the people who have no interest in being led by a rabbi. Which means that you can open your doors wide to a rich array of people who have different spiritual aesthetic needs on a Shabbat and try to get many of them met at the same time. There is advantage to that. But there remain challenges. And when I think about one of the challenges in a community such as ours on a Shabbat morning, I think of a particular bit when I saw the show Blue Man Group. Basically, you've never seen Blue Man Group in your life? I don't know if this bit is consistent in the many years it's been doing their show. Right? Blue Man Group, 3 men, paint their whole face painted blue, so they become kind of anonymous. You don't really know what they look like. And there's all sorts of interesting mind games and very creative approaches to entertainment. One of the times I saw Blue Man Group in Manhattan 25, 30 years ago, each of the blue men were wearing on their shoulders kind of a contraption that had a marquee going above it. So each of them wore it, and there was one line that you had to read, and you had to focus on one. And, of course, you could only focus on one at a time. I remember the one that I was focusing on said something like, "You're reading this now. And now that you're reading it, you want to figure out the rest of what it's going to say. But part of you is wondering what's happening on the other one that you're not reading. But if you skip to that one, you're going to miss this ending. Isn't that a weird situation to be in?" And it was maddening, but it got to something. Because there is a built-in wonder or competition or envy when you're in a place and right next door something else is happening too. Is it better over there? Was the Dvar Torah more on point? Was it a better tune for Kedusha? Did they finish earlier? It's a long Torah reading today, just so you know. I didn't. There's something gained by multiple options in all of our lives, including in prayer and community. There's something lost also. There's an interesting verse. Actually, it's not such an interesting verse, but we're going to turn it into something interesting towards the openings of Parshat Re'eh. And I shared a Hasidic commentary on that verse in the Taste of Torah that probably 2 of you read so far this week. It was also part of the meditation I led yesterday. I want to share an entirely different Hasidic interpretation of the verse. It's the beginning of chapter 12 of the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. And the Torah had said that when the Israelites go to the land of Canaan, they're supposed to get rid of, destroy, annihilate all of the trappings of idolatry and paganism that are in the land. The Canaanite worship is supposed to be eliminated. And then the Torah says, Lo ta'asun kain l'Adonai Elohechem. And you should not do it that way similarly when it comes to Adonai your God. And the question is, what's the similarly mean? Obviously, we're not going to pray in an idolatrous way to God. The whole idea is that prayer to God is transcending idolatry. Rashi offers 2 explanations for what it could mean. Sometimes Rashi just tells you one thing. Sometimes he gives you a short answer. And then he says, Davar acher. And there's another way of reading it. The first thing Rashi says that verse means is, this is about centralization. What did they do, the Canaanites? Every tree, every neighborhood, every corner was its own altar. There was no shared spiritual practice. Each family, each tribe, each person had their own sidur, as it were, their own genuflections to their God. That's not the way we're going to do it. What you're going to do is gather in one place in the temple in Jerusalem. It's going to be built, and all of the prayer is going to be fixed worship. And everyone's going to do it the same way. That's, according to Rashi, the first thing this way. Don't do it that way, meaning the way the Canaanites did it, spreading it out and overly diversifying their worship. But Rashi says, Devar Acher, there's a second thing as well. And what he says is, don't destroy your places of worship, just like I've asked you not to destroy their places of worship. To which your first response is, of course. What does that mean? Don't destroy your places of worship. Isn't that obvious? Did God have to command, oh, by the way, when you build a temple to me in Jerusalem, don't destroy it, just like I had asked you to destroy their places of worship. And on that double commentary of Rashi, there's a commentary by a rabbi called the Sfat Emet, one of the rabbis of the Ger Hasidic dynasty, Rabbi Yehuda Alter Leib of Ger. And he says, those might be two comments, but they're one. Those are two comments of Rashi, but they really mean one thing. Why? Because he says the temple that's going to be built in Jerusalem, and then from the Sfat Emet's perspective, the 19th century Poland, that had been built and was subsequently destroyed not once but twice, that centralized temple was an anchor and a glue keeping together the Jewish people for all the years that it stood. He uses the word shoresh ha'achdut. It was the root of unity of a people that had plenty of reasons to subdivide. One temple, one ark, one ritual, one approach, one shared spiritual experience. And division, and particularly in the Second Temple era, sinat chinam, hatred of one another, and suspicion of one another, and contempt for one another, and how the other one of the Jewish community handles their spiritual practice, that divided us. Love of one another and togetherness and aspiring towards unity is the only way to rebuild the Jewish people. You might think, as you're hearing this, that's an inapt analogy between what divided the Jewish people throughout history that led to the destruction of the temples and today's moment. Are the stakes really that high, Rabbi? Do we really need such lofty language to address what's happening in the Jewish community today? Do we really need such unity? I would say yes. I would say yes. In my adult life, I don't remember an American or a Jewish moment where the fault lines were so toxic, where people had less tolerance for sharing a meal or sharing a minyan with people with whom they disagree. There was a fascinating and depressing article around Thanksgiving last year that said something about, I forgot the exact statistic, the farther away people were driving for their Thanksgiving meal, on average, the shorter amount of time they spent at the meal. And it wasn't because, since they drove longer, they wanted to get back at a reasonable time. It's because the more zip codes you travel, the more likely you're going to be in a part of a city or a state that has a different political persuasion than you, and therefore the less time you're going to be willing to sit and eat turkey with the person sitting to your left and to your right, because they might stand on the political spectrum to your left and to your right. How depressing. And I feel it and I sense it in the Jewish community vis-a-vis American politics, including in the synagogue. People who don't want to sit in the same pew, don't want to acknowledge living in the same community with someone who has a differing perspective on the future of America. Because so now we're living in an era that if your differing perspective is so different, that I'm convinced that it's not just wrong, but it's indefensible and it's immoral and it's evil in all directions. And the state of Israel and Zionism, right? Raise your hand when you remember when that was a unifying force, the Jewish people. When I was growing up, it's not that everyone had exact singularity of thought, but we could come together pretty reliably around the notion of their being and our needing to support the state of Israel and its future in a very challenging part of the world. That's no longer reliable. People are wondering, are their son or their daughter going to bring home someone for them to meet who might be on the other side of that conversation when it comes to Israel's place in the world? How will I have that person at my Shabbat table? How will I have that person on my committee? How will I have that person sitting next to me in shul? And so what's keeping a community like ours, which is wonderfully heterogeneous? From my perspective, it is wonderfully heterogeneous. What's keeping it together? Could it be prayer? Could praying together, singing together, sitting together, be an antidote, or at least a response or a salve on the wounds of disunity in the year 2024? Within the commentary of Rashi that I quoted before, Rashi quotes from the Talmud, or Midrash from the Talmud, a question by Rabbi Yishmael, who asked a similar question I raised before. What does this mean? What does it mean that God was saying, when I say don't do like this, it meant don't destroy your own temples? Would it ever have occurred to an ancient Israelite to build a temple to God and then destroy it with his or her own hands? No, not physically. But spiritually, he said, 2,000 years ago, we're doing it all the time. All the time. We are contributing to the breakdown of the physical and conceptual temples that we've worked so many decades and centuries to build. We do break down our temples with infighting. And we do break down our temples with contempt and distrust. And he was alert back then, and sadly we have to be alert right now to the fact that there are elements of sinfulness that have crept into the crevices of our holiest places. And in the past, that led to it being a crumble into nothingness. In other words, we need more glue if a community is going to sustain itself. In a couple of weeks, you're going to start getting emails and other announcements about an experiment that we're going to be starting around the beginning of November on Shabbat mornings at Temple Beth. It's an experiment. It's not from now until the end of all time. It's an experiment that the clergy and lay leaders have been thinking about, working on for close to a year, and we're excited to unveil to you about what it's going to mean for this community in Shabbat morning. And it's to address many, many needs. One of which is to try to rebuild a vibrancy and a ruach in our building every single week on Shabbat morning, whether or not there's a bar bat mitzvah. And another one of the needs is trying to meet is to have it be more likely that the people who do come to shul on a Shabbat morning, at least for part of the morning, had a moment together that they can talk about, reminisce about, and cumulatively be the glue that keeps a large and disparate community somewhat together. The experiment will not be to enforce conformity, but to build unity, to craft a shared religious experiment, and to be more of the glue that will keep this edifice physically and spiritually intact. You're going to get the details, and then we'll have opportunities to process the details, and not all of you are going to thrill the first time you're exposed to them. But this is very carefully thought out. Doesn't mean it's going to work. That's what an experiment means. But it's very carefully thought out in terms of also anticipating the types of questions that people might have. In general, the experiment's going to be that starting November 1st until the end of June, when we go into a summer schedule, there will be one and only one clergy-led, full davening, full liturgy experience will take place in the sanctuary, beginning at 9:30 unless there's a bar mitzvah, in which case it'll be at 9:15. And in Pilch Hall, next door, every single week, there'll be 3 different offerings focusing on 3 different demographics in our community. Every single week at 10 a.m., there'll be a Tat Shabbat service led by a rotation of the clergy. Every Shabbat morning, just after that, there'll be a family service for families with older kids with singing and davening, an opportunity for the kids to be part of the leading and read some Torah, perhaps. And every single week in Pilch Hall after that, there'll be an interactive, high-level Torah study on the level that normally takes place now in the Beit Tehillim service. Timed, hopefully, well enough for anyone who wants to finish that, come into the sanctuary for a Dvar Torah, a sermon. A Dvar Torah, a sermon to which the rabbis have pre-agreed to keep to a much shorter length than the one I'm giving right now. Because it's not November yet. When those details come out, we'll be eager for your questions and your responses. We'll be even more eager for your leaning in and trying to help make this a wonderful experiment. Right, to quote my Saba, Rabbi Bernard Kligfeld, sometimes more important than making the right decision is making the decision right. We don't know if we made the right decision with this experiment, but we have a much better chance of making it right with all of your input. And if you have questions about the details of that after services today, you can come up to me and you can come up to Rabbi Schatz, and we'll be enthusiastically happy to answer your questions. And you will not go up to Rabbi Shapiro today, even though there's a very wily component to that experience, because today he's not Rabbi Shapiro, he's Abba Shapiro. And you will not go up to Rabbi Kaner Chorny because this is officially the last Shabbat of her sabbatical. She's here as a member of Temple Beth Am today. But after that, you can harangue them with as many questions as you want. At the end of the comment by the Sfat Emet, the Ger Rebbe, he ends the comment with a read of the next verse in the parsha that I referred to. The next verse reads as follows, chapter 12, verse 5. Ki im el hamakom. You're only supposed to do this at the place, makom. Asher yivchar Adonai, that God has chosen, or God will choose. Mikol shiftechem, God chose this one place out of all of the places where the tribes are. Lasum et shemo sham, to place God's name there. And then you have a two-word phrase that no one knows exactly how to translate. The phrase is lishichno tidreshu. The words literally mean lishichno, to place him, to make him. It's a gendered language. Dwell. Tidreshu is plural, meaning you will seek out. Most people translate those two words against trup, against the musicality of the verse, as if there is a significant pause after the word lishichno, as if to say, all of this that God is doing is to do it so that God's presence will dwell there. End thought. Tidreshu, go seek God. Uvata shama, and come there. But the Sfat Emet chooses to translate those words closer to the trup, which connects those two words together. Lishichno tidreshu, which means search for God, tidreshu. Lishichno, in such a way that will increase the chances that where you search and how you search and with whom you search, God's presence will actually be beckoned and welcomed and have a true home. Lishichno tidreshu. The message behind this entire experiment is to invite all of us to seek God out. And where do we seek God out at Temple Beth Am? In this building. And do it lishichno. Do it in such a way that your commitment, your ubiquity, your presence, your voice, your energy has a greater chance of bringing God into this exact spot and making a beautiful space a holy space. Because that's what we are trying to do here. Every Shabbat morning, with Ruach, with attention to many different needs, right here, building this temple together.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.